Greetings and welcome to the first ever Learn and Educate series. My name is Informer and I'll be your instructor throughout the duration of this series. Therefore, it is important for you to make sure that you subscribe, click the notification bell so that you will be informed as to when I post new lessons. Now, before I explain the concept behind my series, let's get to know one another. Let's take a moment to do introductions. And since the platform that we're using is YouTube, we'll have to do our introductions through the comment sections below. So in the comment section below, please state your name, tell us a little bit about yourself, and tell us what you're passionate about. And while you're doing that, I'll take this time to reintroduce myself again. My name is Informer, and in my spare time I like to write, create, exercise, play video games, and watch anime. However, due to my busy schedule, I usually don't get to partake in those activities until the weekend. I am passionate about computer information technology, electronic engineering, and it is my goal to become a computer forensic analyst someday. Now that we have taken care of the introductions, I'll move forward and explain the concept behind my series. The concept behind my series is to provide foundational, instructional, and applicable learning through presenting the content material in a simplistic yet comprehensive format. I strongly believe that before one can understand the advanced concepts of any lesson that is being taught, that they must first grasp hold of the simplistic concepts that led up to the advanced concepts. So I also believe that you should reach one, teach one, for it's lonely in the crowd. I believe that statement holds true. For today's lesson, we'll be journeying through the earliest days of computer history. As we continue through our journey, we'll learn about the concept which led to the development of the computer, and we'll also learn about those pioneers who had an influence on that concept, which ultimately led to the development of the computer as we know them today. So strap yourself in, for this is the history of computers. Can you imagine what life was like before technology consumed it? For some of us here in the 21st century, we don't have to imagine, for we experienced it. And that were people were more friendly, more sociable, and interactive. And that war we also had more time to manage, and we managed it well. Yet in today's fast-paced technology-driven war, the term social interaction is usually defined by the number of likes we have on our status posts, tweets, and the comment section. Therefore, for the younger generation, it's hard to imagine a time period in which technology and computers have never existed. However, that doesn't change the reality that there was a time period. Therefore, how can we understand our future without looking to the past? On a side note, that's why it is important for the younger generation to respect those who came before them. For we have been where you are going, and we just want to steer you in the right direction. And at the same time, we can also learn from you, for you have more information than we've been privileged to during our time. Now, having said that, this is why it's important for those who are younger to learn from their grandparents, their parents, for we have been where you're going. We just want to share our experiences and our knowledge with you so that you do not make the same mistakes as we have in the past. At the same time, we also understand that we could also learn from you in terms of education, for you have a lot of information that we were not privy to growing up, just because of the advent of technology and its proliferation, thereby making what seems old to us new to you, because the lessons that you are learning are repackaged in a different way than it was for us and presented to you. But we must look to the past to understand where we're going. And so with that, we'll begin by discussing what led to the invention of the computer, like what was the concept behind it. And the answer is pretty simple, something that most of us used during our school years. It dates back to the 18th century, and that device is known as the abacus. Yes, that's right, the abacus. The abacus can be thought of as the earliest form of a calculator, for with that you were able to perform any type of mathematical operation. The earliest form of a calculator, for with that you were able to perform any type of mathematical operation. Now, the abacus dates back to the 18th century. During that time period, during that time, the Babylonian era was prosperous. History tells us that the Babylonians were an ancient culture that reigned, occupying southern Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates River. Those areas today are known to us as modern southern Iraq, from around Baghdad to the Persian Gulf. The Babylonians made their abacus out of materials such as sand, twigs, and pebbles. In first century China and in India, an abacus would be used. India also had the use of the abacus at that time. The word abacus itself is derived from two words, two Phoenician. The first word is abex, which means sand, and the Greek word abba, meaning circular or oval shaped. These two words, when combined, describes the appearance of the abacus. As you can see on your screen, there were different types of abacuses, such as the Roman hand abacus, the dust abacus, and the Roman calcus abacus. These ancient abacuses set the standard look for what we know today as the abacus. So now you might be saying, what does the abacus have to do with computers and their evolution? Well, think about it. Back in the early days, like in the Babylonian era, there were many merchants. They needed a way to not only keep inventory of their goods sold, but also a way to make sure they weren't being cheated. They used it for their currency. So through those early abacuses, it was a way for computing fast, a fast type of computing. And what does computers do? They calculate at fast rates. Hardly notice it. That is what allows us to do so many things with computers today. In addition to abacus, there also were known tally sticks, which was another type of memory in which you could record numbers, documents, and messages. With the tally system in school, 1, 2, 3, 4 marks with the slash going between it. That's also an alternative way to add and keep record of numbers. Now, as we move from the 18th century to 1614 AD, there were various pioneers who expounded upon the look and the functionality of the abacus. One of such pioneers was named Nathan Bones. Was named Napier's Bones. It was a device similar to the abacus, but it allowed you to multiply, divide, and calculate square roots and cube roots. A couple years after him, an inventor by the name of William Aldrich created the slide rule. It was like a smaller form of the abacus, and with it you were able to perform multiplication, division, roots, logarithms, and trigonometry. But it was primarily known to be used for addition and subtraction. So as we see, as the time moved forward, the abacus began to evolve, becoming more functional in the sense that you were able to perform mathematical operations more quicker. And let's review what we learned so far regarding the abacuses. Point number 1, the abacus can be thought of as the early calculator. Point number 2, the time period in which the abacus originated was between 24 BC to the 18th century. Point number 3, between 300 BC and 500 AD, there were various types of abacuses, such as the Roman hand abacus, the Celeris, and the Roman Coppius abacuses. Point number 4, the Babylonians used sand and pebbles to make their abacus. Point number 5, the Roman hand abacus was the first to use metal rods to support each row of counting beads. Point number 6, the word abacus is derived from the Phoenician word abex, which means it's sand, and the Greek word abux, which describes the oval or circular shape of the counting beads. When you put those together, it describes what our abacuses look like today. Point number 7, as the abacus continued to develop throughout time, other pioneers expounded upon the idea. A pioneer by the name of Napier's Bones invented a smaller yet complex abacus, and with his abacus he could also perform various mathematical operations. These operations included trigonometry, square root calculations, and the basics. Point number 8, a few years after him, another pioneer by the name of William Aldrich, he invented the slide rule abacus. It was relatively thinner than the previous, and with it as well you could perform various mathematical operations. Although primarily he used his abacus for the purpose of addition and subtraction. And point number 10, the final point. Tally sticks were used as early storage devices. On it, you can record numbers and messages. A few years after William Altrix, a pioneer by the name of Blaise Pascal emerged on the scene, and he would revolutionize the whole concept of the abacus and how it was conceptualized. Blaise Pascal is up next. So as we continue the journey from 24 BC to 1612 AD, Napier's Bones, to 1622, William Altrix, and now to 1642, Blaise Pascal. He was a French mathematician, philosopher, and researcher. Mr. Pascal, he worked with his father as a text receiver. The ideal of his father's Pascalini was a little bit boring to him, in a sense that it used small pebbles and stones to perform addition and subtraction. So therefore he expounded upon that ideal and created the first mechanical calculator, which was capable of carrying 8 figures. In other words, his machine was able to not only add, subtract, and etc., but also able to calculate large numbers, to carry in tens, the hundreds, and 2000s. As you can see on the screen in front of you, the Pascalini was a gear-based mechanical calculator. A mechanical calculator in the sense that when a gear was turned, in the sense that a 10 gear was turned or rotated, it would carry on to the other gears and shift the numbers. In addition to his Pascalini, he also developed the Pascal law, which basically describes how, in addition to his Pascalini, Blaise Pascal also invented the Pascal law. The law simply states that the amount of liquid that is carried in a concealed container distributes equally. And from that law, it was implemented into the invention of the odometer in cars, pumps of petroleum stations. In other words, it was used in the odometers in our cars, and at gas stations, the pumps. And even in our electricity meters outside our homes, as far as the carrying of numbers and the liquids that are being compressed. It all relates back to Blaise Pascal and his Pascalini and the Pascal law. He's the inventor of the first mechanical calculator. Blaise Pascal wouldn't be the only one to expound upon the concept of the machine calculator. Another pioneer by the name of Charles Babbage would also make tremendous leaps and bounds towards mechanical engineering. To some, he was known as the father of computing. Charles Babbage is up next for discussion. As we continue our journey throughout the earliest days of computer history from 1642 with Mr. Blaise Pascal now to 1791, we will discuss Charles Babbage, known as the father of computing. The reason Why he's known as the father of computing is because he invented the first mechanical computer. Mr. Babbage was a British mathematician, the son of a banker, and he was homeschooled. His first invention, known as the difference engine, was primarily used to calculate polynomials functions. In 1822 and later in 1834, Charles Babbage invented the first mechanical computer, known as the difference engine and the analytical engine. Now, the difference engine is primarily used to calculate polynomial functions, whereas the analytical engine could automatically compute various mathematical equations without limit, record and print out the results onto paper. Much like Mr. Pascal's invention, his system too was mechanical. And now we'll watch a brief video describing more of how the analytical engine worked and the difference engine, just to get a better understanding of how his invention contributed to the computers as we know them today.
London banker, a bully at home, but his money kept his son and heir financially comfortable for life. Cambridge educated in mathematics and supremely self-possessed, Charles became an iconoclastic writer and habitual inventor. In 1832, the drawing room of his London home became a showcase for demonstrations of a small section of his difference engine, a far from finished device by which he intended to revolutionize calculation by mechanizing it. At his soirees, London's intellectual society watched what you see now. As Babbage cranked its handle, this machine produced a series of polynomial calculations that were repeatable and error-free. Most astonishing, it was automatic. Any of his illustrious guests might have operated the handle as well as Charles Babbage, perhaps the geologist Charles Lyell, or Charles Darwin, or Charles Dickens. Once set, the machine seemed able to proceed to think on its own. But what was called the beautiful fragment of the machine Babbage had intended to build was all he ever finished of it. In fact, his imagination had already moved on to an even more ambitious mechanism, one that would make obsolete the abandoned machine. The analytical engine would be a general-purpose calculating automaton. For most of 30 years, he would revise and improve his notional design. Only a few partial sections of it were built, this one after Babbage's death by his son. The analytical engine was an ever-evolving machine. Each breakthrough elegantly drawn up, annotated to describe mechanical motions, with a coding system that Babbage claimed was his finest invention. The analytical engine may be the most intricate operating mechanism ever fully realized with paper and imagination alone. In 1846, Babbage abruptly changed course. As if determined to make good on an old obligation, he worked for 2 years to complete a full set of drawings for difference engine number 2. It would require 8,000 parts, only a third as many as the first. He offered it to the government, but did not protest when it declined to build it, and the drawings were carefully put away. Eventually, they came from the Babbage estate to rest in the library of the Science Museum in London. More than 130 years later, in 1985, the museum's new curator of computing, Doran Swade, became convinced the institution could build Difference Engine number 2. After all, with the intact drawings, it seemed feasible and within financial reach. It took 17 years and drama to rival Babbage's so long ago. And it works, just as Babbage designed it. Every turn of the engine's driving handle is carried through gears, cams, rods, levers, and springs to release and arrest precisely aligned number wheels. A helical arrangement of steel fingers continually pulls the register towers to find and perform the carrying of tens. In its continuing sweep upward, it is mesmerizing.
At this time, we'll pause right here for another quick review of what we learned so far regarding the pioneers of computing history. First up, we have Blaise Pascal, 1642. Mr. Pascal, he worked with his father as a text receiver. He was bored with the method that his father was using to calculate texts, and so he improved upon the design and invented the first gear-based mechanical calculator in a sense. He also invented the Pascal law, which is still used today in regards to our odometers and our cars and our electric meters outside our homes. The Pascal law simply states that liquid that is contained in a small area, the compression thereof is equally proportioned to it. And from him, we moved on to the father of computing, Mr. Charles Babbage. So moving forward from Blaise Pascal, 1642 to 1791, we arrive at the father of computing, a pioneer by the name of Charles Babbage, who not only expounded upon the original concept of the abacus, but revolutionized mechanical engineering as we know it today. He also set the foundation for the modern components that we use in our computers today. We'll take a look inside on our next lesson, but hang tight, we're almost there. We're almost arriving at our journey's end, so hang tight. This journey through computer history has almost reached its pinnacle. Almost reached the end of our we almost reached the end of our journey through computer history, but before we reached our current position in our timeline, we must first travel through the 5 generations of computing history. Now, what defines a generation? Things such as fashion, trends, style, industries, inventions, and ideologies. These all define what a generation is. So hang tight. The 5 generations of computers are up next. Now we begin. The first generation of computers began Now we'll begin by discussing the 5 generations of computers. First generation computers were between the period of 1946 to 1959. The second generation between the time period of 1959 to 1965. And this generation of computers incorporated transistors. and the third generation of computers from the time period between 1965 to 1971.